Hi, I'm Jonathan Hayfitz, and welcome to Law on Film, a podcast that looks at law through film and film through law. This episode, we look at On the Waterfront, the celebrated 1954 American film directed by Elia Kazan and written by Bud Schulberg. The film stars Marlon Brando as the ex-prize fighter turned New Jersey longshoreman Terry Malloy. Malloy struggles to stand up to mob-affiliated union boss Johnny Friendly, played by Lee J. Cobb, after Malloy is lured into setting up a fellow dock worker whom Friendly has murdered to prevent him from testifying before the Waterfront Crime Commission about the violence and corruption at the docks. The pressure on Malloy rises as he falls in love with Edie Doyle, played by Eva Marie Saint, the murdered dock worker's sister, and as he watches local priest Father Pete Barry, played by Carl Malden, fight to defend the dock workers against corruption. Malloy ultimately defies his older brother, Charlie, played by Rod Steiger, who's Friendly's right-hand man, and testifies against Friendly at great personal risk. While the film is about a courageous fight against a corrupt power structure and injustice, it's also influenced by director Elia Kazan's own controversial decision to act as an informant against fellow directors, writers, and actors during the McCarthy-era Red Scare. Joining me to talk about On the Waterfront is Warren Scharf. Warren has been the executive director of Lenox Hill Neighborhood House since 2003. Warren served previously as the attorney in charge of the Brooklyn Neighborhood Office of the Legal Aid Society, the attorney in charge of the Brooklyn Office for the Aging of the Legal Aid Society, and the vice president for the Partnership of the Homeless. He's the recipient of the Legal Services Award from the Association of the Bar of the City of New York and is a graduate of Columbia College and Columbia Law School. I should add that after law school, my first job as an attorney was working under Warren at the Partnership for the Homeless, where I learned a tremendous amount and had a wonderful time getting to know Warren. So, Warren, it's so great to have you on the podcast.
Jonathan, thanks for having me here. Very excited.
So, On the Waterfront depicts corruption, extortion, racketeering, kickbacks in the Longshoremen's Union in Hoboken, New Jersey. How did this system of corruption, extortion, et cetera, work in the movie?
They called it a shape-up is what I read. But basically the workers, the unionized workers, didn't get picked to load or offload the ships unless they kicked up money each day and were picked for the job by the union bosses who were in the movie and in real life corrupt.
Right. And you can see that in the movie where like they're going to pick who gets to work that day. And so if you want to get chosen, you got to pay money to the union bosses, to Friendly and his cohorts.
Right. And then like in the end of the movie, when you could see the relationship between the ship owners and the union bosses is also one of corruption, because when the tide turns, the ship owner doesn't take the union boss's call. So it looks basically like they're controlling not only who works, but what comes in and what goes out of the docks and what the shipments are. And the movie depicts like the Hoboken dock, but I think it applied in real life pretty much to the entire, it sounds like New York, Brooklyn, certainly New Jersey area.
Yeah, certainly. And the control, I think, was, although that, the movie is talking about the sort of New York City waterfront, so like Red Hook in New York and Hoboken, New Jersey, I think the control by the mob and the, kind of corrupt union leadership was like down the Eastern Seaboard. So if you were trying to ship stuff in, you had to go, into the Eastern Seaboard, you had to go through them.
There's a point in the movie where they're offloading the Irish whiskey and they're excited about it. And that scene actually figures prominently in what develops. You want Irish whiskey and you want it delivered. I'm sure it's controlled both by the union and the ship owners, and everybody's kicking back.
I mean, interestingly, although the film is a fictionalized account, it was inspired by a series of Pulitzer Prize-winning articles in the New York Sun by Malcolm Johnson, which exposed the Underworld Syndicate of organized crime controlling the New York, New Jersey waterfront. And these articles led to congressional hearings and eventually an interstate waterfront commission compact between New York and New Jersey to try to address the waterfront corruption, which was a long process, it seems, with a lot of setbacks. Bud Schulberg, the screenwriter, spent a good deal of time in Hoboken, hanging out at the waterfront bars and following the development. So, I mean, do you get a sense that the movie kind of tracks, at least to some extent, what actually happened?
Having seen this movie so many times, and then I, occasionally have looked up to see about what's based on reality. But, in thinking about this podcast with you, when I looked for those Malcolm Johnson articles, the Pulitzer website, I think he wrote like a series of 24, and they had 2 of them up there with an interesting kind of cover story. I know Schulberg said he did his own reporting and the movie was based on that, but it looked a lot like what was in those articles. Seemed like a pretty accurate description of what he had covered. And in fact, when you start reading about it, they call it the Syndicate, and it sounds like I'm watching good film noir. So it was pretty exciting. And then actually the other thing I read in that, which was interesting, is Malcolm Johnson went on to co-found the Guild newspaper union, which is kind of also interesting since this is a film about union corruption, but he turned out to found the union.
Yeah, that is interesting. And I mean, it's about union corruption. And I guess one of the themes we're going to come back to later too is that it's about the union corruption, but it's like a strong defense of unions or non-corrupt unions, right, too. So the idea is that they're
taking back, because in the end, the workers want to take back their own union from the mob infiltration. And then they do it finally at the end of the film with Terry's help. I thought the articles were interesting, and clearly the docs were important. I know a lot of the scenes, they're shot in New Jersey, but I had always thought that it was actually depicting the Red Hook docks, but I don't think that's actually the case. I'd always been under the impression it was supposed to be Red Hook, but I think it was right. It was the entire port area, and I don't think a lot of the Jersey docks, they developed in the 50s and the 60s. They were later, because I think through the war, everything was through Brooklyn and Manhattan, and then I think the containerization and the train system all went to New Jersey later, right around when the movie's happening and when the articles were written.
Yeah, and I think it was filmed, as you said, New Jersey primarily, I think in Hoboken as well. It's an interesting history that I think it's definitely worth a deeper dive. As I read about all the sort of famous mob figures, in the later decades,
I loved it.
Yeah, they needed it on the waterfront too. I mean, it could have been like a Scorsese movie or something. There was so
I
much
think they
there.
had it. It was The Godfather too, because it's the same, right? There's that whole scene with Michael testifying in front of whatever that was, the Senate Interstate Commerce Commission, which I think was also a real commission, right? And they're looking at mob infiltration. Yeah, there could have been a lot of movies out of the same source material. I do think, despite what I might think about Kazan personally, he's got a lot of themes covered in this movie. And there's also a pretty interesting love story, but maybe that's because I think Eva Marie Saint is perfect in this film. And she gets a lot of credit, I think. And she did win, I think they gave her Best Supporting Actress, which also I would be wondering, why is she Best Supporting Actress and Brando got Best Actor? But I don't know about the categories well enough. But there's so many different themes going on in this movie.
Well, that's a separate topic, but I think certainly true today. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure back, in 1954, but you put someone forward, you choose the award. And sometimes I think there's some gaming going on about, you put them in for the award that they're going to.
Oh, and where you win.
Yeah. So in the most recent Oscars, Kieran Culkin won Best Supporting Actor, but it was almost a lead role, but they put him in, and so he could get it. So in any event, what's interesting too about Eva Marie Saint's her first film role. It's her film debut.
I don't think I remember that. She's still alive. And, even pictures I think I've seen of her fairly recently, she's as beautiful as she was when she was in this film and Exodus. She's just spectacular. Incredible role.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she's one of the, if not the last from the kind of golden age stars that is still alive. I mean, Olivia de Havilland was one, but fairly recently passed away. So one of the themes that is around boxing, right? So Malloy, right, before he becomes a longshoreman, he was a rising star in the boxing scene, and he had a big fight. If he'd won that fight, you learn that he would have had a chance for the title.
More corruption,
yeah. Right? He's forced to take a dive by corrupt union boss Lee J. Cobb and his mob associates who'd bet on the fight, and his brother Charlie, right? Yeah. Charlie the gent, Rod Steiger, who's like the right-hand man, and that leads to probably the most famous scene in the movie, in the taxi, where Brando says to Rod Steiger, the Rod Steiger character, right? You're the one that you should have protected me. You forced me to take this dive.
Remember that night in the garden, you came down my dressing room and said, "Kid, this ain't your night. We're going for the price on Wilson." You remember that? This ain't your night. My night, I could have taken Wilson apart. So what happens? He gets the title shot outdoors in a ballpark, and what do I get? A one-way ticket to Palookaville. You was my brother, Charlie. You should have looked out for me a little bit. You should have taken care of me just a little bit so I wouldn't have to take them dives for the short-end money.
Well, I had some bets down for you. You saw some money.
You don't understand. I could have had class. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody. Instead of a bum, which is what I am. Let's face it. It was you, Charlie.
So, I mean, how does boxing and the sort of prize fighter theme play into the movie?
I think when I watch it, I don't know when I think about it, right? There's all those film noir and these. I mean, the filming in this movie is just genius, right? And we will come back and mention, Bernstein's score and the gritty, realistic shots and Carl Malden and with Marlon Brando on the waterfront when he pushes him to go confront Eva Marie Saint. So boxing seems to me so much of those movies in that era. And even though when I was in law school, actually, I would go down to the Garden to watch the Golden Gloves with law school classmates. And I don't, like now, right, does the Garden still host Golden Glove boxing? And, I graduated law school 42 years ago, but I'd say boxing seems like to me, I know it's still a big business, but from a different era. And I know you told me that some of the extras and small parts are other boxers, and there's the boxing and corruption, and Underworld's always connected, we think, with, boxing, racetracks, things to make money. But it also seems to me to fit right in with the film and the look of the film and the grittiness of the film. So the only thing that always occurs to me that bothers me when I watch this film is without getting spoiler alert for those who haven't seen the movie, when we're toward the end and he goes down to confront Friendly behind their Union Shack, which seems to be on a float in the harbor. If Perry was this middleweight boxer who could have been a champion, I would have thought he would have taken out Friendly with like one or two punches. John Friendly throws his coat over him, and then they kick him, and then the other guys. But I always thought, I don't know, Terry should have landed two or three punches, and that would have been it. But the boxing, to me, fits in with boxing, the bar scene, the ethnic wedding where he's drinking and dancing with Eva Marie Saint. It just, like, the whole thing works for me.
Yeah, I think boxing would have resonated differently in 1954. It's kind of like you were saying. I mean, it was, along with baseball, like the sport, right? And it was, boxing matches, and, they were just watched by large
Everyone.
segment of the population. Now, I mean, today, and to your point, I mean, it's not even a nationally televised sport anymore. So I think the idea of like someone who could have been the champion, it may resonate differently. And yeah, I totally agree in that scene at the end when Marlon Brando takes on the Lee J. Cobb character, Johnny Friendly. You do think if he was that good, I mean, he would have taken care of
that would have been it.
Cobb character. Although he was a tough cookie, Lee J. Cobb character, but still.
He was, but
yeah.
If you get hit by a boxer, in the gut or twice in the head, most people would go down. Listen, if that's actually, I can think of my only criticism when I watch this movie, which I've seen so many times.
Yeah. Well, just as a side point, I think there's a famous, I think it's true, it's an anecdote that Sylvester Stallone, who's, a big guy, was, back in his prime, wanted to, I think there was like a boxing scene for, I guess, one of the Rocky movies. And I think it was Ernie Shavers, who was a professional heavy hitter. And Shavers doing it, but he was, doing it with kid gloves. He's like, I'm not going to really hit you. And Stallone's like, no, you got to hit me. I think he got like once. And I think Stallone was like, done. I barely couldn't get up.
That would be it. Yeah, I think that's what they do. Yeah, that's why I think it kind of, I mean, I'd say the other fake part is, even though it's the clip you've showed, when they're in the back of the car with the kind of the curtain drawn, it's clearly a stage set, and then there's stuff now maybe I'll get it wrong, and maybe that I don't know, they didn't get along on the set, Brando and Steiger. I was thinking, like, I don't know, that I thought I had read that maybe they didn't even record that scene together. They recorded it separately, and now that may not be correct, but that kind of, it's staged, right? And it looks staged, whereas the rest of the movie sometimes looks like a lot of film noir, like filmed on the streets with a graininess. But I think the boxing thing works. I mean, I don't know, Terry, it's good that Terry was a boxer and he clearly wasn't a bookkeeper, but, and that he wasn't a lawyer like his brother or whatever. But actually, was his brother a lawyer in this movie?
I think the sense is Charlie is a lawyer. I mean, he's a gent. He wears these fancy clothings. I think one of the other characters calls him a butcher in a camel coat or something, camel hair coat. He's definitely educated. He's smooth. He's polished. And he's sort of like viewed to be kind of like more the brains behind the operation, which includes, a lot of the heavies, which, as you said, includes like, I think 3 former heavyweight contenders. So they're now lost to history, and I never heard of them before, but I'll read their names. 2-Ton Tony Galento, Abe Simon, and Tony Moreo, all of whom were fought and defeated by Joe Louis.
But that's like makes me think also like when, again, like The Godfather, there were ex-mobsters advising on the set in the film. So it lends a, reality. But if they boxed with Joe Louis, fought Joe Louis, then they had to be real. So everybody looks real in this movie. It's not like they don't look like, and the person who might not, Eva Marie Saint, really brings it off as the young Catholic girl who gets sent away to Catholic college to be protected by the sisters so she doesn't have to witness the grittiness of what's going on around her.
Yeah, exactly. As her father says, things that are not, like reflecting kind of the gender assumptions, things that are not fit for a young, pure woman to see. So, the other character, right? Carl Malden plays Father Berry, who's based on Reverend John Corridan, who was a local priest who fought union corruption. And again, kind of keeping with the film's realism, Malden did I think he spent time with him, and he famously wore Corridan's hat, right? He has that famous hat, priest hat that he wears. And he has this great kind of sermon against the union bosses and against silence and telling, the workers that Christ is with them in the docks.
Boys, this is my church. And if you don't think Christ is down here on the waterfront, you've got another guest coming. Every morning, when the hiring boss blows his whistle, Jesus stands alongside you in the shape-up. He sees why some of you get picked and some of you get passed over. He sees the family men worrying about getting their rent and getting food in the house for the wife and the kids. He sees you selling your souls to the mob for a day's pay. Now, what does Christ think of the easy money boys who do none of the work and take all of the gravy? And how does he feel about the fellas who wear $150 suits and diamond rings on your union dues and your kickback money? And how does he, who spoke up without fear against every evil, feel about your silence? You want to know what's wrong with our waterfront? It's the love of a lousy buck. It's making love of a buck, the cushy job, more important than the love of man. It's forgetting that every fella down here is your brother in Christ. But remember, Christ is always with you. Christ is in the shape-up, he's in the hatch, he's in the union. He's kneeling right here beside Dugan. And he's staying with all of you. If you do it to the least of mine, you do it to me. And what they did to Joey and what they did to Dugan, they're doing to you. And you. All of you. And only you, with God's help, have the power to knock them out for good.
So how much of a force was, Corridan on the waterfront, and what is Malden's role in the film as the priest?
Let's talk a little about Malden. I mean, I grew up with him with whatever it was, Streets of San Francisco, TV show. And I know a lot of people love him in this role. And originally I didn't. And I didn't know if I didn't like him, the acting, or if I didn't like the pretend holier than thou. But every year, the more I see it, the more I kind of now appreciate his character and his acting in the film. He seems to evolve in the film too. He gets pushed by some of the dock workers and by Eva Marie Saint to like not just talk, but to be real. When he hosts the meeting in the basement of the church, even the other priest doesn't. When things turn south, the other priest is annoyed because they're all going to be injured and in danger. What I'd read is that he's fairly closely modeled on the real priest. The role of the church in these neighborhoods. I think a lot of the dock workers were immigrants. So I think a lot of them were also, there are a few black actors playing longshoremen in this movie, but I think actually, at least in the Brooklyn Manhattan docs, the proportion of Black Americans was much higher than they depict in the movie, but a lot were clearly Catholic. So I always assumed that the priest, both in real life and the Carl Malden character, would have had more sway than perhaps somebody else in the community. But when your livelihood and clearly your life depends on, doing what you're told and not ratting somebody out or not, bucking the boss, my guess, a little like we'll talk later about Kazan, like Kazan's got some quote where I don't mind if hurting you a little to save me from hurting myself a lot. And that was basically Kazan's quote. So I don't know. I always thought like the Carl Malden role is important, but I just kind of, as I've gotten older and as I've seen the film more, I've started to appreciate his part in the movie in a way in the beginning I thought was a little like you're meant to feel him in the movie, which is he's like talking, but maybe we shouldn't listen because he doesn't really know what it's about. And how do they show that he knows what it's about? Like he has a drink and a beer or he has a cigarette. I mean, like they give you, those are the signals that he's okay. He's one of us.
There's a scene in the bar later in the movie. So basically, Charlie, Brando's brother, kind of tips him off that if Brando doesn't play ball and refuse to cooperate, was Brando's thinking about talking to the, testifying before the commission, they're going to have him killed. And Charlie sort of tips him off and lets Brando get away. And so for that, the mob Friendly has Charlie killed. And so Brando's furious. He goes to the bar. He's looking. He's going to try to find Friendly, and he has a gun. He's going to try to kill him. And it's Malden who stops him, right? He comes into the bar, and he actually kind of going back to the fight idea, hits Brando with an uppercut and knocks him out, knocks him down.
And that scene bothers me too, because then some of the Johnny Friendly's guys get away during the, that break. And I realize Brando's upset and his hand is cut because he put it through glass, Terry put it through glass to save he and Edie from getting run over by the mob truck. But how's that priest going to knock down Perry Malloy? Like, doesn't really ring true to me, but he does. And then they have a drink together.
Well, then there's that line. He's like, "I'll have a beer," or "Give me a beer," right? Which is right. So,
sure.
No, exactly. But the other thing about which I noticed kind of again watching it was, it's the Malden character. I mean, he talks about religion. He talks about Christ being with all the workers and the themes of the crucifixion. But he's also the ones that says, look, the way to fight, right? If you want to fight back against Friendly and the corrupt union bosses, you fight through the law. You fight in the courtroom.
You want to hurt Johnny Friendly? Huh? You want to hurt him? You want to fix him? Do you? No. You really want to finish him?
What do you think?
For what he did to Charlie and a dozen other men who are better than Charlie? Then don't fight him like a hoodlum down here in the jungle, because that's just what he wants. He'll hit you in the head and plead self-defense. You fight him in the courtroom tomorrow with the truth, as you know the truth. Now you get rid of that gun. Unless you haven't got the guts, and then if you haven't, then you better hold on to
it. He's the one that says, this is how you fight, right? This is how a fighter fights. It's going in and testifying before the Waterfront Crime Commission in this case.
Right, and maybe that's just my personal beliefs or how I was raised in Queens, but I don't know that doesn't even seem to do it in the movie. Forget the Kazan part in real life. Right, Terry testifies, but then is ostracized. Yeah, I guess the ship owners turn on Friendly, but it's basically because Fred Friendly ends up in the water and all the workers walk behind him to show. So I don't know that his testifying is what did it. I guess there are other ways. You could have ousted your union leadership. Nobody crosses the line and works unless everybody works, which is what they actually end up doing, right? We're not going in until, Poor Terry's been beaten half to death and can barely stand, and Edie wants him left alone. And again, in a scene to me that's reminiscent of another movie I love, Wait Until Dark with Audrey Hepburn and Alan Arkin, which is a great movie from the early 70s. But without giving it away, and there is a spoiler in there, but at the end of the movie, Audrey Hepburn's character is blind, and Efren Zimbalist, her husband, who hasn't been in most of the picture, says, like, walk to me. And she's been going through a 2-hour terrible scenes in the movie, I'm like, well, this is what we need to make her do. But that's what they do to Terry, right? He's got to get up and walk out and march the union workers in. But the priest, the Carl Malden character, he wants him to testify. And that really strikes me as the Kazan, it is the Kazan justification. Like, I'm doing what's right because that's the enemy and we should talk. And I don't know, I'll ask you, the law professor, that's a crime commission, but that's not a court, right? They're taking sworn testimony.
Yeah, it's an investigative commission, right? I think, as I see it, but it is sworn. I agree. I mean, like, on the one hand, Malden, this is what we do in America. We win through the truth. We take things to the courtroom or the commission, and we fight
right.
with the law and the truth and the facts, not in the back alley, because that's where you're going to get beat. And so, it is a big step in terms of Brando taking on Friendly and the corrupt bosses, but I think a lot of it is, right? It's sort of ennobling the informer, which is, again, kind of gets to the elephant in the room and what Kazan was doing with this movie, right? And ennobling Kazan, in a sense, for testifying before the House Un-American Activities Committee. But you're right. On the other hand, like, at the end of the testimony, right, Friendly's weakened, right? You see the person who's above him saying, I don't want to take Friendly's call. He's discredited. We got to stay away from him. And Friendly's weakened. At that point, he can't just go kill Brando because there's been this public attention. But he still has power, right? And there's this, as Brando's walking out of the courtroom or the commission room, Friendly says, basically, you're never going to work again.
You just dug your own grave. Go fall in it. You're dead on this waterfront and every waterfront from Boston to New Orleans. You don't drive a truck or a cab. You don't push a baggage rack. You don't work no place. You're done.
And you realize, actually, Brando goes back. He's with Eva Marie Saint, and he's like shunned by the dock workers, even though he stood up to Friendly, and they're like talking about Eva Marie Saint's trying to say, we should go somewhere else. And he's like, no, I'm going to finish the fight and stand up to him. But it's not until he goes to the docks and takes on Friendly, first in the physical confrontation, and then by leading the workers and not backing down, that Lee J. Cobb, Friendly, is defeated.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So that's why, I know he wants him to testify, and I know that's the Kazan thing, but it doesn't really resolve it, and the movie doesn't end there, right? The movie keeps going, and Terry actually has to be the fighter he was. And again, I don't know, like, the priest wants him to testify, whereas, other priests or other people of faith might say there's other ways to find opposition or faith, like stick together or.
Right. The law part, weakens Friendly, but it's not until there's sort of like the real show of power, right? And he's able to convince the workers. First, after he tries to fight Friendly and does eventually knock him down, it's all Friendly's goons come in. They beat him senseless. They beat Brando senseless, but he gets up and he leads the workers. He shows he's not going to back down. And only then, with the real show of power on the docks.
Right. And back to all the real life mobsters from, not Capone and Meyer Lansky. In our history, including to all the criminals today in and out of our government, they're rarely convicted, right? The Friendlies of the world rarely. What Capone does go eventually for tax evasion. Some of these guys in real life were just deported to Italy, even though they were murderers. So I don't know that the testimony in the commission, even if this movie kept going, was going to lead to him losing power. He just had Friendly goes, let's hide the guns. They're like, I don't know, getting the electric chair or the gas chamber ready for me. But he's not leaving. He's not fleeing. He's not giving up power. So to me, the lawyer, it always showed me the limits of fairness and the judicial system in America. It's really kind of another important topic right now in America.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, there's a union point, I think, because the idea is like his power is ultimately weakened. His power comes from fear, right? Friendly's power. And if other people don't, if the dock workers, he has them because he gets to choose who works. But if they're united, right, and if they, basically say, we're not going to give you this power, none of us are going to work for you this way, then, Friendly's out, because then the ships aren't going to get uploaded, and the people over him, right, in the sort of capitalist system are not going to, Friendly's no longer useful to him. I mean, I don't know. It was kind of a point about, to me, a little bit about like unions in terms of where they ultimately get their power from, which is the kind of solidarity.
It is. Well, I was for many years a legal aid attorney, and I was part of the union, and we still get UAW solidarity. So yeah, the power, but like in this movie, what does Friendly do here as a corrupt criminal and union boss? He picks them off one, and he throws them off the roof. He throws Joey off the roof, right? The woman who's telling Edie to be careful says they did the same thing to my son. So it's hard, like it is now, for even people, some in power, even people with billions of dollars, to stand up and do the right thing. They get pressured, and a lot of them, like Kazan, Kazan really didn't have a real downside. He still could have worked. And so I think during bad times, people will do especially bad things, and you'll get to see clearly, maybe in history, who does good and who does evil when given the opportunity.
Yeah, no, I mean, the movie's very clear. Like, if you cross Friendly and the union and the corrupt bosses, that's it. Joey is killed. He's thrown off the roof, you mentioned. And one of the other guys, Dugan, one of the other ones who working with the priest, appeared before the commission and gave, these pages of testimony, which the union bosses get a hold of. They kill him too. They drop a crane on top.
The Irish whiskey on him.
Yep, exactly.
Right. So, but that was also interesting. Friendly gets the testimony and finds out about it. So there's clearly a link in the police or the commission on the judicial side, right? How does he get that? He gets that through more corruption, but from the legal system. In fact, when the cops, after Terry's testimony, when he's escorted home by the two cops, one kind of calls him a rat. So I think there's probably lots of, both feelings, but lots of corruption that's not just limited to the longshoremen's union.
And that's the other thing. I mean, there's the idea of being a rat and cooperating with law enforcement and the crime commission. Brando's sort of ostracized, right? And so I think the idea about who's the rat and what does it mean to be a rat is kind of central to the movie.
It is. And I think that was hard for me when I was younger. Well, it's probably still hard. When I was growing up in Queens, being called a rat was bad. You would never want to rat out your friend. It would happen. It's happened to me and my friends. One of my closest high school friends, I'd given him answers to the math test when he was out the day. We were both good math students, but I gave him the answers, and then the teacher thought we might cheat. And so she confronted him, and he never gave me up. She failed him, but he never gave me up. So that's in the movie, right? The kid who, and I think in real life, father actually, I think, was killed on the docks, I had read. The kid who plays the good-looking blonde head kid who also raises pigeons and is in the same gang that Terry had started. He kills all the pigeons after Terry testifies because Terry's a rat and no good, and he wants nothing to do with him. And I think, clearly that's important with what's happening in Kazan's life and HUAC and testimony, but I think was something that probably still runs through not just movies, but American life. People, when we say don't snitch on your friends, like that's a sign of loyalty. And even if your friends may have done something not good or bad, we don't look upon it as a great character trait in American society to put your hand up and volunteer that one of your own kind did something. You defend your own. And so I think it was kind of hard for me in the movie because I guess my normal feeling was, maybe I'm not with Harry on this, and I'm conflicted as well. Like, even if it's bad and even if that's not what you should be doing.
Yeah, I really do think the boy sort of symbolizes the idea that Tommy, I think his name is, right, the betrayal of the community when Terry Malloy talks to the the crime commission. And you're right, he was 14 at the time. His father had been killed when he was 4 months old by the violence, the kind of violence around the waterfront. He was, living in Hoboken with his widowed mother, and he was cast. I think it's exactly right. It is a real issue. And turning to kind of Kazan, this is the other sort of like sub-theme of the movie is that, right, despite being ostensibly a story about union corruption, it's to some extent a parable about Kazan, who testifies before the House Un-American Activity Committee, which was created in 1938 by the House of Representatives to investigate disloyalty and subversive activities, I'll put quotes in those terms, on the part of private citizens, public employees, and organizations suspected of fascist or communist ties. And one of the main targets, right, was Hollywood. What impact did the House Un-American Activities Committee have? Why did it target Hollywood?
I'm certainly no HUAC expert. It starts, though, in the late 30s, and I think originally it was all kinds of subversives, and I think that included fascism at the time. And obviously, the 30s, 40s, the Red Scare, the war, the Russians, the Nazis, we're still playing it out today. Roy Cohn is instrumental in HUAC, and he still lingers on in his influences with Trump. So, this stuff, our history is not very old. So I think, from what I know, Kazan, and I think it came up in later Oscars when they gave him like a lifetime award, right? He, I think, voluntarily agrees, right? I think there are different, some people fled, some people testified, some people, wouldn't name names. He not only, voluntarily testified and named names, including Odette's, but then he took out a full-page advertisement in the paper to justify and to encourage others to do it. I still think that regardless of the topic, America doesn't usually appreciate people who voluntarily read, even if they agree with the cause, even if they agree with what the testimony is. And since lots of people didn't, and lots of people, including Kazan, were during, terrible times in the 20s and 30s for short periods of time, were members of the Communist Party. Regardless of what I think about the Communist Party, whether you don't have to go and name other people, you can go and talk about yourself. Just admit to what you did and not tell what other people did, including people who were your friends. And so right, this movie, which is not just seen, is an apology for and defense for what he did. I don't know, resonated for years. When they gave him the Lifetime Award, some would clap and applaud. I read Meryl Streep was one, and others. Warren Beatty, and then some, Ed Asner refused to stand up and acknowledge him. And probably some know about what went on and some don't. Some say, which is also a hard thing, like, I love this movie and I may not approve of what he did. I probably don't approve of what he did because I wouldn't testify against my friends, even if they did the wrong thing. I'd like to think that that's part of my Queens-based core. I don't start out with how can I help and volunteer to testify. But on the other hand, the movie is spectacular, and he was really a very talented director, not just of film. And so I know you'd ask me that, and I'm not sure I know what my own answer is can you separate the art from the artist? And probably most of the time I can, because I don't know enough about the artist to know what bad things they did. Probably if I knew something about everybody, I might not like any art. But when I was thinking about Wagner, I love Tristan and Isolde. I assume The Merchant of Venice, but it's not a very favorable depiction. And I can go on. And there are lots of films that are on I don't know, I'm not saying the same thing, but you don't really watch you don't see Kevin Spacey movies a lot anymore. And so you separate the film from Kazan. But the HUAC part is big here, because it's his life and his apology. But I don't know, I'd ask you, Jonathan, in real life, he's testifying about people he knows and used to know, and some whom were his friends, about what he says is a great threat to America. Terry's testifying, I don't know that Terry's testifying mostly because of the unfair control of the Union. They killed his brother. And he wants revenge for the killing of his brother. And that seems to me very kind of Perry-like primal base instinct. So I don't know that Kazan, who might want to see himself in Terry, I don't know that they're equivalent.
Yeah, that's interesting, like the motivations. I think he's motivated by his love for Edie, and then obviously by desire for revenge, and kind of Malden, the priest, sort of steers him away from physical violence and kind of points him and points the fighter in the direction of kind of testifying and standing up in a different way. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I do think he moves some, and I think he does to some extent see, you know, what's wrong with all of it, all the corruption. Even in the scene in the car with his brother Charlie, he says, you know, there's got to be more. Like, it sort of dawns on him, and he kind of connects it to his own personal life and the problems of the corruption. But, you know, I agree. I mean, he's, you know, he has mixed motives maybe. But the other thing is, right, a lot of the HUAC stuff was basically just a witch hunt, right? And so you had them going after people. In a lot of ways, it's, you know, to talk about something today, it feels a lot like the TDI witch hunt today, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, in the film, this guy was, you know, friendly, was bad guy. I mean, they were killing people, right? There was corruption, right? I mean, if you're going to be a rat and so to speak, or inform, I mean, it's not a bad context to inform, but that wasn't the context that Kazan was informing about. And the reason he informed, you know, was because he wanted, I think he basically said it, was he did it so he could have his, you know, have his career. Yeah.
Keep working. Yeah. Right. Self-motivation. Yeah. That doesn't strike me as a very, I disagree with virtually everything that happens in the United States every day today. But I have the least respect, which is hard in this panoply of who I have the least respect for both the people who should know better and who don't seem to have any fixed positions in their lives and just do whatever they can so that they can either have power or money. And those people, to me, if you know, are in Dante's, you know, Inferno, are in a deeper level of hell than people who I might disagree with vehemently, but who at least believed in their own cause. And, you know, I get the feeling from Kazan because it was like I wanted to work and it was going to affect me. And I think, wow, that's not a great motivating factor. But I'd say he got his karma, or, you know, like he got his treatment for the rest of his life. So I guess people should do what they believe based on principle. But I think, unfortunately, it's not that I worry about Terry's motivation. You know, I don't know if Terry's a deep thinker, but, you know, Terry realizes in the car that he could have had he could have been the contender, and that life didn't work out well for him. I'm not sure Terry quite had the epiphany, the unfairness of the docs. Terry was sitting a lot, you know, in the no-show job in the back too. I'm not faulting him. I just think there's a lot of self-interest going on. But I guess if he was most self-interested, and he could have just left with Edie, right? They could have just left, but they don't.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie does say to him, look, I mean, obviously he lost his shot, but he said, you know, we'll set you up. We'll give you this higher position. You never have to work. You can have a cushy life. And he sort of says, and, you know, it obviously played, you know, brilliantly by Brando, that there's got to be something, there's got to be something more. So, you know, I agree. I don't think he's the most articulate, thoughtful thinker, but I do think he thinks about something, you know, kind of off kilter about it. But you're right. I mean, he's certainly driven by.
But he's very different from Edie, who is thoughtful. And she's pushing him to do the right thing because it's the right thing. I mean, she does want revenge for what happened to her brother, or revenge is right, justice perhaps is the right word. But she seems to be pushing more for the, like, we got to stand up and do the right thing. She's not afraid at all.
No, right, exactly.
She's not afraid. She's down in the basement of the church. I realize she's with Terry, but they're hitting with bats. And they came to hurt, and so she seems like a very tough character. She just seems to be doing it more out of the right reason.
I mean, just going back to Kazan for a minute, you know, one of the things, and I think is implicit what you're saying is, you know, well, one, he didn't, you know, he would sort of willingly testify. He didn't put up much of a fight, if any. And the other is that he had sort of significant amount of clout at the time. I mean, unlike, you know, more than many others, right? So, yeah, so when Kazan was called before the committee in 1952, he was already a leading director of Broadway and Hollywood. He directed Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman on stage in 1949, the film adaptation of Streetcar Named Desire in 1951. So people think he could have pushed back, but instead, right, he testifies, and as you said, he takes out this full-page ad in the New York Times 2 days after testifying, justifying his decision and calling on other people to do so. And, you know, you can see that, you see that in the movie through Terry when he's at the end, when he's like, I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I testified against Putative Friendly.
You ratted on us, Terry.
From where you stand, maybe, but I'm standing over here now. I was ratting on myself all them years. I didn't even know it. Come on. You give it to Joey, you give it to Dugan, you give it to Charlie, who was one of your own. You think you're God Almighty, but you know what you are?
Come on.
You're a cheap, lousy, dirty, stinking mug. And I'm glad what I've done to you. You hear that? I'm glad what I've done. And I'm gonna keep on doing it till I get... Come on!
Yeah, so I mean, it's problematic. And Arthur Miller, interestingly, right, that was a rupture between them, right? They had been close friends. There's a story in a book, Victor Navasky, Naming Names, where Miller, whose success had owed so much to Kazan's directing of Death of a Salesman, Miller sends Kazan a copy of his play, A View from the Bridge, which dealt critically with informing. And Kazan writes back, so the story goes, I would be honored to direct it. And Miller says, you don't understand. I didn't send it to you because I wanted you to direct it. I sent it to you because I wanted you to know what I think of stool pigeons. So, there were consequences then, and they reverberated, including at the 1999 Oscars that you mentioned.
Though, I'm not going to push back from my own position on Kazan. It is hard, and since I'm clearly, I'd say I'm a film buff. I'm not a film historian or an historian. It's hard to know what pressures people feel when they're doing things in the times they were living in. I mean, it was a very bad time in America with the Red Scare, but we've come out of Depression and World War and Holocaust, and then atom bombs and Russians with bombs and spies. So I guess I think if you want to say something, talk about your own opinions, but you don't have to throw everybody else under the bus. And if it's only to get yourself a better job, it's hard for me to respect that, especially when you yourself were a communist earlier, whether I agree or disagree. So, and I'm not sure, a lot of it was about Hollywood clearly, but it wasn't, yes, and obviously people did things under pseudonyms, but I'm not sure Broadway was affected in the same way Hollywood was. So the clear thing is maybe what were you actually at risk of? And what did you think when you were doing it? Did you really think this was going to be useful and help? Because I think part of his defense later in life was he didn't name any names they didn't have. And I think, okay, but you haven't been arrested by the Gestapo and they're torturing you for names. And I think that's exactly what's happening now in America. Everybody muzzling themselves. That's the Times headline today, and silencing themselves. And I get it if you're to your point, Jonathan, if you're the person who's greatly at risk, then I understand why you're not out in front leading the charge. People should protect you. But there are a lot of billionaires in America who probably don't like, or hopefully don't like, what's going on. And it'd be nice if they could say something, both individually and collectively, to say, we run businesses and we're capitalists and we denounce this. And everybody runs for their own monetary interest. And some people are at real risk. In history, some people really are at risk, and some people do very valiant things and pay the price or escape from it. But it doesn't seem like I'd be curious what threat Kazan was under and whether he really needed to do it, because he doesn't sound like he was a true believer, according to his own testimony, about why he did it. And then he just strikes me as, I don't know, certain vice presidents who went to Yale Law School. Okay, their positions seem to have evolved very quickly from recently, from all kinds of things. So when were you lying to us? But I think this time in history is going to do a lot like the 50s. You're going to see people do a lot of bad things, and then we'll see how, whoever ultimately wins will write the history of how they're viewed.
Yeah, just to give credit where, a number of people stood up, but one of the more prominent ones was
Dalton Trumbo,
who refuses. He's blacklisted from Hollywood. I think it is different from the New York theater.
Yeah.
For a decade. He does win 2 Oscars under a pseudonym. So there's someone. And then there are others. I mean, it is important to sort of take into account some of the pressures people were under. Lee J. Cobb, who plays Johnny Friendly in the movie, also testified, but it's a little bit different, right? He refused for 2 years, right? So he pushed back for 2 years. Although he's a famous and highly regarded actor, he didn't have the power that Kazan had. And he, explained, he said, basically, talked about the fear. He talked about, lack of money, lack of being able to get work. He does it. So the choices are tough. People made different ones, but I just find Kazan's Well, his choice and then his decision to make a movie, an apology or justification about it is, adds another layer. Now that said, I agree. I mean, I think the movie stands regardless. It's a masterpiece and it's filled with other themes, but I don't think you can, you can't watch it without talking about or thinking about Kazan.
No, but so many other people, like so many other, I don't know, Zero Mostel, so many Jack Gifford, so many other famous people were called to testify, and people, Zero Mostel, if I remember right, he defended political freedom and his right to think and say what he thought, and then he had adverse effects on his career, and lots of people did. So I think clearly you can't separate it, and Kazan intended it. But I'd say, if you don't, we just showed it at work with many of our staff. My staff who are much younger don't have any of the history and the HUAC, and the names don't mean much or anything to them. And so they just watch the movie on the face without the context of, was it an apology? Was it a defense? What is it? Should we be able to enjoy it? But for me, funny, because in thinking about it, I don't particularly respect Kazan for what he did, but I'd be hard pressed to say he wasn't a genius at making movies, because not only do I think so, but the most famous actors think he was a genius, and Kubrick and famous directors. Can you separate the art from the person? And I guess I usually do, because I don't usually pay attention to everything the director or the actor says. There's stuff going on now, and there's stuff with J.K. Rowling, and there's stuff with everyone. And I understand how people who are personally affected who don't agree can't separate it. And I could understand how Holocaust survivors, I think my parents wouldn't listen to Wagner, but I like listening to Tristan and Isolde. I can't say that I don't. And I could see how those are hard issues until it either retreats so far to the past, or like my young staff, you don't have the relevant history, or maybe it doesn't interest you. But I think it adds such a deeper layer to watching this actually brilliant film, which I'd be hard pressed to say isn't in my top 15.
I mean, I agree. And it's in this one, it's hard to, it's not so much separating the art and the artist, because there's, the artist who made this movie did bad things. This is about that thing.
It is about that thing.
Yeah. So,
right, but I don't know. When I used to read, we'd read Roald, it was a Roald Dahl bookstore, our daughter, and then I'd read about his life, and I think, whoa, this is bad. And then you could see some of it coming through even in children's books. So I think a lot of people have a lot of stuff, and we don't normally inquire. I don't inquire when I go to the supermarket. I might ask, is it organic, or, where was it sourced? But I don't know if the owner of the store always is a good person or a bad person. So I love this film, though, and I think the performances are, apart from the history, the theory, the writing, the Waterfront Commission, just as a film, Bernstein's score is just genius. It's perfect. Well, in so many, look, it's Rod Steiger, it's Lee J. Cobb, Marlon Brando, and in what people think is, one of, if not one of the greatest performances ever on screen. I think there are just so many things that are perfect about this movie, including the score, and the cinematography is brilliant, and the lines are great. So I don't know, it seems to have the test of time. And then I think the history will recede.
Yeah, it holds up extremely well. And I agree with all those things you said. It's sort of the complete package. And there's really not a wasted scene, wasted moment. it's just superbly done. Everything, as you kind of watch it again and again, it's just, everything is there and works kind of, I think, perfectly. Other than I think Brando would have knocked out Friendly with a punch, as we talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's our one change. It's not like he should have knocked him out, because that would have ruined the point in the film. I just always felt like maybe Friendly could have cheated with a knife or something. They'd done something. He did trip him or kick him, but I wanted something that seemed sneakier, because that would have justified it. And I'd say for me, the test when I think of my favorite films is they get better and better every time I watch them. I've seen this film, dozens of times, but I've seen everything on my top, not 10, or my top 100 list so many times I don't know. And I'd say they just get better I don't get bored. I see things I didn't see before. I enjoy them even more, like a Beethoven symphony. I could hear it again and again.
And, we can't wrap up without talking about, one of the small uncredited roles in the film by an actor I think you're fond of.
Fred Gwynne.
Very young,
Yeah.
very young looking Fred Gwynne.
Yeah, so he's uncredited, but I grew up with him on TV. And I definitely saw him at the Shakespeare Theater in Connecticut when I was in junior high school. They bussed us from Queens to see, I don't remember what it was. It might have been Julius Caesar. And Fred Gwynne was in it. We were very excited because it was Fred Gwynne. So he's got the same head, and he's obviously a big guy and a kind of an odd-looking person. And he's sitting in that box in front of the commission when they're all waiting to testify. I don't forget, he's the treasurer. He's one of them of the union. So for me, it's always been a thrill. But I'd say, like, my staff didn't watch The Munsters, so it doesn't mean anything to see Fred Gwynne on the scene. There are other famous. When I was looking at the cast again, there are other people who are very well-known people in small and uncredited parts, which I always look at, when I always read the trivia. And one of the ones I just saw, which I've never paid attention to, is Martin Balsam is the backup investigator. So he is a famous and has a great career. But Martin Balsam is that other investigator. He's up on the roof with a more seasoned investigator cop who saw Terry Box. But it's Nehemiah Persoff as the cab driver. And he was in so many things. And he plays one of my favorite roles. He's in Some Like It Hot. He plays Little Bonaparte. He's the crime boss. When I was watching the movie last time, I couldn't place him, but I said, I know that face, and that's who it is. He was in hundreds of things, TV, movies, but he plays in Some Like It Hot also on everybody's top 10 list and top comedy, and he has a good part in that too.
I should say for listeners of the podcast, two of those actors at least were in very famous law movies. Fred Gwynne, of course, plays the Southern judge in My Cousin Vinny, and Martin Balsam is one of the jurors in 12 Angry Men.
Right, which would also make it on my top 15. And since there are so few, in my mind, so few good law movies. I mean, there's law in movies, but so many, they're often not so good that I think they're not always in my list. But 12 Angry Men clearly is one of those. Yeah, he's great in that too.
Warren, it's been so great having you on the podcast. Thanks so much for coming on and talking about this great film On the Waterfront.
Thank you, Jonathan. I've enjoyed our conversation. It makes me think both more about the movie, which I like because it's a spectacular film with so many good parts, but also thanks for sending me things to read about the docs and the articles written about the Syndicate and about HUAC, because all of this still resonates today. And so it's not only good for me to think about it with the movie, but to think about a part of American history that actually overlaps with my life. So thank you, Jonathan.